My name is Maya. 15 years ago, I woke up in a freezing hospital room recovering from an emergency cesarean section, only to find my husband standing over me with divorce papers. He looked at my bleeding, exhausted body, pointed to our premature baby girl in her incubator, and called us a burden. He walked out with his mistress, leaving me with exactly $12 to my name. What he did not know was that the tattered chemistry notebook he left behind would become the foundation of an empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build a kingdom from the ashes of a broken heart. The rhythmic, piercing beep of the neonatal monitor was the first sound that broke through the heavy, disorienting fog of anesthesia. I slowly opened my eyes, immediately fighting against the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit. A sharp, burning agony ripped through my abdomen with every single shallow breath I took. I had just survived a grueling emergency surgery, a terrifying and traumatic delivery that had nearly cost both me and my newborn daughter our lives. My throat felt exactly like sandpaper, and my entire body trembled violently from the traumatic aftershocks of the major medical procedure. I turned my head with immense effort, desperately searching the sterile white room for the clear plastic incubator holding my tiny, fragile baby. Instead, my eyes found Marcus. My husband of 4 years was standing rigidly at the foot of my hospital bed. He was not looking at me with concern, love, or relief. He was not asking the doctors about our daughter's critical condition. Instead, he was wearing his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, checking his heavy gold watch with a look of profound, barely concealed annoyance. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice barely a raspy croak echoing in the quiet room. "Is she okay? Have you seen her?" Marcus did not rush to my side to comfort me. He did not reach out to hold my trembling hand. Instead, he reached into his sleek, expensive leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and tossed them carelessly onto my lap. They landed with a heavy, dismissive thud directly over my fresh surgical incision, making me gasp aloud in sudden pain. "Sign these," he said, his voice completely flat, clinical, and devoid of any human emotion. "I need this finalized today so I can move on." I stared down at the thick white pages resting heavily on my thin hospital blanket, my exhausted mind struggling to process what was happening in front of me. The bold black letters printed at the very top of the first page blurred together, but the word divorce stood out like a brutal physical blow to my chest. "What is this?" I asked, my fingers trembling uncontrollably as I touched the sharp edge of the paper. "We just had a baby. I just got out of a life-threatening surgery. It is over." "Maya," he replied, crossing his arms firmly over his chest and looking down at me. "I am not doing this anymore. I am not playing house with you, and I am certainly not dragging myself down to take care of a sick, premature kid." The sheer, unadulterated cruelty in his words paralyzed me completely. This was the man I had loved unconditionally, the man I had sacrificed my entire youth and future for. Before I could even formulate a rational response, he dropped his next devastating bomb. He casually mentioned that he had already been to the bank earlier that exact morning, while I was unconscious on a cold operating table. Fighting desperately to bring our child into the world, Marcus had systematically emptied our joint savings account. I took the $40,000 he stated matter-of-factly, without a single ounce of shame. "I am closing on a massive new house in Maryland tomorrow morning. Consider the money my rightful payback for the last 4 years of putting up with your complete lack of ambition." My agonizing physical pain suddenly paled in comparison to the immense psychological shock tearing violently through my chest. Lack of ambition. The sheer audacity of his statement echoed loudly in the quiet hospital room, mocking the very foundation of our entire marriage and everything I had built for him. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with hot, angry tears that I absolutely refused to let fall down my cheeks. "Lack of ambition," I repeated, forcing the heavy words out through the agonizing pain radiating from my abdomen. "I gave up my full-ride chemistry doctoral program at Howard University for you. I worked 3 exhausting, mind-numbing jobs simultaneously. I washed greasy dishes at a local diner, tutored high school kids in advanced math, and worked grueling overnight shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy, all so you could get your MBA without taking out a single student loan. I funded your entire degree with my blood and sweat, Marcus. He rolled his eyes dramatically and let out a harsh, deeply dismissive laugh. You made a choice, Maya. Nobody forced you to drop out of your program and play the suffering martyr. You were never going to make it in the highly competitive corporate world anyway. You were far too busy playing in our cramped kitchen with your little chemical mixtures and homemade lotions. Now I am the director of operations at a major corporate firm, and you are just a sad woman with a mountain of medical debt. I stared at him, feeling a terrifying, icy coldness wash over my entire being. The man standing arrogantly before me was a complete and utter stranger. He had willfully used me as a convenient stepping stone, draining my bright intellect, my youth, my energy, and my finances until he finally reached the very top. Now that he had his prestigious title and his corner office, he was viciously kicking the ladder away. You are leaving your own flesh and blood, daughter, I said, pointing a shaking pale finger toward the dim corner of the room where the humming incubator sat. She is fighting for her tiny life right now. She desperately needs her father. Marcus glanced toward the life-saving incubator with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. She is your problem now, he sneered, adjusting his expensive silk tie. I am moving up in the world, Maya. I need a clean, immediate break. I absolutely cannot have you and that sick kid dragging my career down. You are just dead weight to me now. Those two awful words hit me much harder than any physical strike ever could. Dead weight. I had poured my vibrant youth, my undeniable brilliance, and my entire trusting heart into building his solid foundation. I had carried his child for months, nearly dying in the surgical process. And to him, I was nothing more than disposable garbage to be tossed aside on his rapid way to the top. Before I could even attempt to respond to his monstrous declaration, the heavy wooden door to my hospital room swung open loudly. The scent of an expensive, overpowering floral perfume instantly invaded the sterile, clean air, making me violently nauseous. A tall blonde woman walked confidently into the room. She was wearing a pristine white silk blouse and carrying a highly recognizable quilted Chanel handbag. I recognized that specific bag instantly. I had seen the exorbitant charge on our shared credit card statement 2 short months ago. Marcus had explicitly told me it was a necessary corporate gift for a senior client. Chloe wrinkled her nose in disgust as she stepped further into the room, waving a perfectly manicured hand in front of her face. Ugh, she complained, her high-pitched, whiny voice grating horribly against my ears. It smells absolutely terrible in here, Marcus. Have you finished dealing with this trash yet? We have an expensive dinner reservation at 8 o'clock, and I am completely exhausted. Marcus immediately softened his posture, his entire harsh demeanor changing entirely as he looked at her. He placed a remarkably gentle hand on her lower back. Almost done, babe, he promised her with a sickeningly sweet smile. Just getting her signature on the final pages. He turned back to me, his face instantly hardening once again into a cruel mask of deep impatience. He pulled a heavy silver pen from his jacket pocket and thrust it aggressively toward my face. Sign the papers, Maya. They include an ironclad clause stating you completely waive all rights to ever seek alimony or spousal support. I am not paying a single dime for your lifelong failures. I looked at the silver pen, then down at the divorce papers, and finally at the two terrible people standing arrogantly before me. In that singular, crystal-clear, defining moment, the remaining fragile pieces of the naive self, sacrificing girl I used to be, shattered completely into dust. In her place, a fierce, highly calculating survivor was born from the ashes. I did not cry. I did not beg him to stay. I suppressed the searing hot pain in my stomach and the suffocating agony in my heart. My brilliant analytical mind, the exact mind that had effortlessly earned a full ride to Howard University, snapped into incredibly sharp focus. I will sign your papers, I said quietly, my voice eerily calm and steady, but I'm changing one specific clause right now. Marcus frowned deeply, exchanging a quick, highly annoyed glance with Chloe. What are you talking about? If you want me to permanently waive my right to alimony and let you easily walk away with the savings you stole, you have to waive something in return, I stated, gripping the silver pen he had offered me. You will sign a legally binding addendum right here, right now, stating that you permanently forfeit any and all rights claims and financial interests in any intellectual property patents or business ventures I create from this day forward. Marcus stared at me for a split second before bursting into loud, echoing, mocking laughter. Chloe joined in, immediately covering her mouth, as if my legal demand was the absolute funniest joke she had ever heard in her life. Intellectual property, Marcus scoffed, shaking his head in deep disbelief. What intellectual property, Maya? Your little homemade shea butter recipes. You are a broke, unemployed college dropout sitting in a public charity ward. You own absolutely nothing of value. He snatched the pen back from my hand, rapidly scribbled the requested legal addendum onto the margin of the contract, and signed his name with a dramatic, arrogant flourish. He was so incredibly arrogant, so completely blinded by his own perceived superiority, that he did not even realize he had just willingly handed me the golden keys to my future kingdom. Fine, he mocked, tossing the signed papers back onto my lap. Keep your precious kitchen experiments. Just sign the divorce decree right now so we can leave this depressing place. I signed my name with steady, highly deliberate strokes. I handed the papers back to him. He grabbed them eagerly, wrapped his arm tightly around Chloe, and walked out the door without looking back a single time. He never once looked at his fragile daughter in the incubator. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone in total, deafening silence. A moment later, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the bedside table. I reached over and opened the bright screen. It was an automated notification from my banking app. Available balance $12.40. I set the phone down gently. Next to it sat my battered, coffee-stained chemistry notebook. The thick notebook, filled with months of complex biochemical formulas, advanced botanical extractions, and revolutionary melanin-rich skincare solutions, I had painstakingly formulated late at night while Marcus slept. The exact notebook he had just called worthless garbage. I looked closely at the brilliant scientific equations covering the pages. Then I slowly turned my head toward the gentle, rhythmic hum of the incubator. I watched my tiny daughter fighting bravely for her life, breathing steadily against all impossible odds. "Do not worry, Zarya," I whispered into the quiet, sterile room, my voice forged from pure, unbreakable steel. "We are going to buy their whole world." 2 weeks later, the brutal reality of $12.40 hit me like a physical blow. The eviction notice arrived exactly 14 days after I brought Zarya home from the neonatal intensive care unit. Marcus had flawlessly timed his financial withdrawal to ensure the rent check bounced. We were thrown out onto the sweltering streets of Atlanta with nothing but 2 suitcases and the medical equipment keeping my fragile daughter breathing steadily and safely. I found a cramped, terribly hot, airless apartment in South Atlanta. It was a tiny, stifling box above a noisy laundromat where the summer heat trapped itself against the peeling yellow wallpaper. The air was thick and heavy, but it was ours entirely. I set up Zarya's crib in the only corner free of drafts. Then I turned my absolute focus to the tiny kitchen. The scratched formica countertops and rusty sink became my new laboratory. I had absolutely no money for specialized equipment. I used sterilized mason jars instead of glass beakers. I repurposed a cheap digital meat thermometer to measure the exact boiling points of my botanical extractions. My Howard University education had not been erased just because Marcus stole my tuition money. The profound knowledge of cellular regeneration and bioactive compounds still lived inside my brain, sharper than ever before. With Zarya balanced carefully on my left hip in a faded fabric sling, I spent my days and nights mixing. I was determined to formulate a skincare line specifically engineered for melanin-rich skin. For decades, the mainstream beauty industry had either completely ignored us or offered harsh, chemical-heavy products that damaged our cellular barriers. I knew the exact molecular science needed to finally fix it. I worked relentlessly, driven by the rhythmic breathing of my daughter against my chest. I extracted raw, unrefined shea butter, blended it with cold-pressed marula oil, and synthesized a unique bioactive peptide complex I had theorized back in my university days. The kitchen smelled intensely of earth-sweet almond and raw determination. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. I operated on pure adrenaline and tap water. Every single penny I managed to scrape together from doing late-night freelance data entry went straight into buying raw bulk ingredients. I painstakingly hand-filled each amber glass bottle, printing my own labels at the local public library. I named the company Origen, a silent promise to generate an entirely new life out of absolutely nothing. The formula was absolutely flawless. It penetrated the epidermal layers, perfectly hydrating and repairing the skin at a deep cellular level. I tested it on myself, watching my stress-ravaged skin transform and glow within days. It was a major scientific breakthrough, born in a sweltering apartment kitchen. I knew I held $1 million revolution in my blistered, exhausted hands. But knowing its true value and getting the powerful corporate gatekeepers to actually see it were two completely different and fiercely difficult battles to fight and win. I was ready. I secured a highly coveted pitch meeting with Dermacorp. They were an elite, heavily funded venture capital firm that specialized entirely in backing new beauty brands. Getting into their towering glass building in downtown Atlanta required calling in every single favor I had left from my university networking days. I walked into the massive, freezing cold boardroom carrying a worn canvas tote bag filled with my precious amber bottles. Zaria was strapped tightly to my chest in her carrier, fast asleep. The room was filled entirely with older, wealthy white men wearing tailored gray suits. They stared at me with varying expressions of deep annoyance and outright amusement. I stood tall, ignoring their judgmental glares, and began my carefully rehearsed presentation. I laid out the exact biochemical deficiencies in current market offerings. I handed out the sample bottles, explaining the complex cellular regeneration properties of the Origen formula. The lead investor, a man named Richard Thorne, picked up one of my amber bottles. He unscrewed the cap, sniffed it with a deeply condescending sneer, and wiped his fingers on a sterile napkin. "This is a very cute little kitchen project," Maya Richard said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair and steepling his fingers together. "But you are pitching a product designed exclusively for the urban market. Our extensive market research shows that demographic simply does not have the disposable income necessary to support a premium skincare price point. You are trying to sell a luxury product to people who buy their lotion at the discount pharmacy." I felt a familiar burning flash of intense anger ignite in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly even and entirely professional. "My research proves otherwise," I countered firmly, gesturing toward the thick printed reports I had placed in front of them. Black women spend nearly 9 times more on beauty and hair care than any other demographic in this country. We are actively starving for high-quality, scientifically backed products that actually cater to our specific biological needs rather than treating our skin as an afterthought. Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed loudly across the long mahogany table. The other executives joined in, shaking their heads as if I were a foolish child throwing a tantrum. "Numbers can be twisted to say anything," Maya Richard dismissed casually. "We are not interested in funding your little startup. The risk is far too high for such a niche, unprofitable demographic. However, the botanical peptide complex you mentioned is mildly interesting. We are willing to purchase the entire formula from you today for $20,000. We will own the patent, and we will likely shelve it or strip it down for parts to use in our existing profitable mainstream lines. Take the money, Maya. You clearly need it." I looked down at the $20,000 offer printed casually on a single sheet of paper they slid across the table. It was a blatant insult designed solely to humiliate me completely. I did not argue or plead. I simply reached across the polished mahogany table and snatched my amber sample bottles right back out of their hands. I scooped up my printed research files, adjusted Zaria safely in her carrier, and walked out of the icy boardroom without saying another word. I had wasted enough time trying to beg the gatekeepers for a seat at their table. I was going to build my own table entirely. If the wealthy executives at Dermacorp refused to see the immense value of my product, I would take it directly to the people who desperately needed it. I started bypassing the corporate retail system completely. I packed my worn canvas tote bag with fresh bottles of Origen every single morning and hit the hot pavement of Atlanta. I walked into every bustling local beauty salon I could find, offering free samples to the owners and stylists. I stood outside the busy gates of Spelman College and Clark Atlanta University, handing out flyers and tiny tester jars to college students. On the weekends, I set up a folding table at bustling Black-owned beauty expos, letting people physically feel the rich, transformative texture of the cream on their own skin. The grassroots momentum built faster than I could have ever dreamed. The very first batch of 50 full-sized bottles I listed for sale online sold out completely in less than an hour. The college students posted glowing video reviews of their glowing, clearing skin. The salon owners started demanding bulk wholesale orders because their clients were begging for more. The community rallied fiercely behind Origen, lifting my small brand up through pure word of mouth. My cramped hot apartment transformed into a massive shipping warehouse overnight. I hired 3 local college students to help me pack boxes, while I continuously mixed new batches of the formula in my kitchen. By the end of the 3rd month, I was staring at a business bank account balance that literally brought tears to my eyes. I had officially hit my very first $100,000 sales month. We were no longer just surviving. We were building a highly profitable empire. I poured myself a cheap glass of wine to celebrate the massive milestone, watching Zaria sleep peacefully in her newly upgraded crib. The heavy burden of poverty was finally lifting off my shoulders. Then a sharp, sudden knock at my front door shattered the quiet celebration. I walked over and found absolutely nobody there, but a thick, ominous manila envelope had been slid underneath the doorframe. I quickly tore it open. It was a formal cease and desist order heavily stamped with the intimidating logo of Dermacorp's legal department. The letter arrogantly claimed that my wildly successful Origen formula infringed upon a vague, dormant patent they legally owned. They were aggressively demanding that I shut down my entire business operations immediately, or they would take everything I had rightfully earned and completely destroy me in federal court. I stared at the thick stack of aggressive legal threats spread across my scratched, flour-dusted kitchen table. Dermacorp had not just sent a simple warning letter. They had ruthlessly filed an emergency injunction to freeze my business bank accounts. By 8 o'clock the very next morning, my hard-earned $100,000 was locked tightly behind a massive, impenetrable wall of corporate red tape. I could not pay my raw material suppliers. I could not pay the 3 dedicated college students helping me pack boxes. I could not even buy premium formula for Zaria. Richard Thorne and his boardroom full of arrogant executives genuinely thought they could starve me out of the industry. They assumed I was just an uneducated, desperate woman playing with lotion in a hot kitchen. Someone who would immediately panic and surrender her life's work the moment a team of highly paid, expensive lawyers bared their teeth. They severely underestimated the fierce resilience of a mother who had already survived the absolute bottom of human despair. I did not panic, and I certainly did not surrender. I gently placed Zaria in her crib, brewed a massive pot of incredibly strong black coffee, and pulled out the terrifying stack of patent documents Dermacorp had attached to their cease and desist order. I was a brilliant chemist, and reading complex technical documentation was my native unspoken language. I spent the next 72 hours completely and utterly awake. I drank black coffee until my hands shook uncontrollably, pacing the cramped, warped linoleum floor of my stifling apartment, meticulously reading every single line, every hidden clause, and every chemical compound listed in their dormant, dusty patent. Dermacorp legally claimed my specific use of a highly concentrated botanical peptide directly infringed on a broad generic patent they had filed over a decade ago and never actually developed into a viable retail product. They relied heavily on intimidating legal jargon to mask the underlying biochemical reality. But at hour 68, bleary-eyed, exhausted, and running on pure spite, I finally found it, the fatal, undeniable flaw in their billion-dollar corporate armor. Their ancient patent explicitly outlined the extraction of the botanical peptide using a high-heat abrasive alcohol-based solvent process. My proprietary Auragen formula utilized a revolutionary cold-press water-soluble extraction method that perfectly preserved the delicate integrity of the active molecules without degrading the underlying cellular structure. From a purely legal and strict biochemical standpoint, my specific method created an entirely different molecular compound. Their patent claim was not just weak, it was completely fundamentally and legally void. They had absolutely no ownership over my formula. I typed up a brilliant airtight scientific rebuttal, citing specific federal patent precedents and complex molecular breakdowns, and sent it directly to their lead counsel with a crystal clear message. I would never back down, and I would gladly slaughter them in federal court if they dared to proceed. But I knew winning the lengthy legal battle in the quiet shadows of a courtroom was not going to be enough to secure my future. Dermacorp would simply find another underhanded way to bleed my tiny startup dry with endless, suffocating litigation fees. I had to take the fierce fight directly into the glaring public light. I had to hit them exactly where it actually mattered to them, their pristine public reputation and their heavily guarded bottom line. I grabbed my cheap cell phone, sat down in my cramped kitchen laboratory with my glowing amber bottles lined up perfectly behind me, and hit record. I spoke directly to the tiny camera lens with raw, unapologetic, and unfiltered honesty. I told the entire internet exactly what was happening behind closed corporate doors. I explained how a massive white-dominated venture capital firm had mocked the urban market directly to my face, claiming Black women were not a viable or profitable demographic. I revealed exactly how they had offered me insulting pennies for a revolutionary game-changing formula, only to turn around and try to steal it through predatory, malicious legal bullying when the community proved their financial models completely wrong. I held up the aggressive cease and desist letter for the whole world to clearly see, exposing their insatiable corporate greed and their blatant, undeniable disrespect for Black female entrepreneurship. I posted the passionate video across every single social media platform available, specifically tagging the loyal HBCU students, the dedicated local salon owners, and the influential beauty bloggers who had supported my very first handmade batch. The viral explosion that followed was immediate, deafening, and absolutely catastrophic for Dermacorp. The raw video was shared 10,000 times in the first hour alone. By midnight, it had crossed 5 million global views. The African American community galvanized around Auragen with an unprecedented fierce ferocity. Major celebrities, vocal social activists, and highly prominent beauty gurus reposted my story, continuously demanding immediate corporate accountability. The public backlash against Dermacorp was swift, highly coordinated, and utterly brutal. Angry consumers organized massive, widespread boycotts of their existing mainstream skincare lines. Major retail chains began rapidly pulling their established products from premium shelves to avoid the escalating negative public relations nightmare. Within 48 hours of my upload, Dermacorp's publicly traded stock took a massive, unprecedented dive, losing hundreds of millions in market valuation. Richard Thorne was publicly humiliated and forced to issue a groveling public apology, completely dropping the frivolous lawsuit to stop the catastrophic financial bleeding. In the triumphant wake of their utter defeat, Auragen transformed overnight from a popular local product into an unstoppable national sensation. We became the ultimate symbol of Black excellence, a defiant, glowing testament to resilience against systemic corporate oppression. Online orders flooded our system so fast that our website servers crashed twice in one day. The $100,000 month quickly and aggressively escalated into a $1 million week. I immediately moved my entire operations out of the cramped, sweltering South Atlanta apartment and into a legitimate high-tech manufacturing facility. The rapid progression of the next 15 years was a relentless, breathtaking upward trajectory of phenomenal, world-changing success. We never slowed down for a single second. We never compromised our strict core values or our commitment to quality. I poured every ounce of my brilliant scientific mind into vastly expanding the Origen line, creating specialized anti-aging serums, deeply hydrating cleansers, and revolutionary invisible sun protection specifically engineered for melanin-rich skin. My tiny, suffocating kitchen laboratory faded into a distant, humbling memory, completely replaced by the towering reality of a massive state-of-the-art skyscraper located right in the bustling heart of downtown Atlanta. The new Origen headquarters was a breathtaking architectural marvel constructed of sleek, dark glass and polished steel. It stood proudly as a towering, unshakable monument to the billion-dollar empire a discarded broken wife and her 12 remaining dollars had built from absolute scratch. I walked through the gleaming, pristine, marble-floored lobby every single morning, greeted with profound respect by hundreds of dedicated, highly paid employees who believe fiercely in my leadership. Immense wealth, undeniable power, and global prestige accumulated in massive, unstoppable waves. I graced the glossy covers of premier international business magazines, delivered powerful keynote speeches at exclusive global economic forums, and secured my brilliant daughter's future with ironclad, untouchable trust funds. Zaria grew up roaming the high-tech research and development labs, absorbing the complex science and the relentless driving work ethic that defined our extraordinary lives. Fast forward 15 glorious years to the absolute dizzying pinnacle of our hard-fought success. Origen is exactly 24 hours away from launching a historic multi-billion-dollar initial public offering on the stock exchange. The entire global financial world is watching our company with bated breath. The atmosphere inside my sprawling, glass-walled penthouse office is electric with anticipation and triumph. I am standing confidently by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering, sprawling Atlanta skyline, dressed flawlessly in a bespoke razor-sharp designer suit that projects absolute, unshakable authority. Suddenly, the glowing red emergency line on my polished mahogany desk flashes rapidly, shattering the quiet focus of the room. I press the sleek speaker button, and the frantic, highly strained voice of my elite head of building security fills the quiet air. Ms. Maya, we have a major escalating situation in the main lobby. The security chief reports, his tone tight with intense urgency. A man has aggressively breached the outer perimeter and is causing a massive destructive scene. He is threatening to call the national press and completely ruin the IPO launch tomorrow morning if we do not comply with his demands. He says he will not leave the premises until he is allowed up to see his beloved wife. A cold, deeply dangerous smile slowly curves the corners of my mouth as the words settle into the quiet room. The pathetic, cowardly parasite from my past has finally crawled out of the decaying woodwork, drawn helplessly by the irresistible, overwhelming scent of billions. Send him up to the private elevator, I instruct smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any fear, panic, or surprise. It is Marcus. The gleaming silver doors of my private elevator slid open with a soft chime. I stepped out into the expansive, sunlit lobby of the Origen building. The massive space was usually a serene temple of polished white marble, towering indoor palm trees and trickling water features. But today it was a scene of chaotic disruption. 4 of my top-tier security guards had formed a tight, impenetrable wall near the reception desk. Behind them, struggling frantically and shouting loud demands, was the ghost of my past. I walked forward slowly, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing loudly across the pristine marble floor. The chaotic noise died down instantly as my staff noticed my arrival. The security guards parted respectfully to let me through. There he stood. 15 years had absolutely ravaged Marcus. The arrogant, highly polished corporate climber who had callously abandoned me in a freezing hospital room was completely gone. In his place stood a remarkably aged, deeply tired man. His once thick dark hair was severely thinning and aggressively graying at the temples. He wore a poorly fitted, frayed navy suit that looked like it had been pulled from the very back of a forgotten closet. He smelled faintly of stale coffee, cheap cologne, and an overwhelming, suffocating aura of desperation. By stark contrast, I radiated absolute, unshakable power. I was dressed in a bespoke emerald green tailored suit that commanded immediate respect. My posture was flawless, my expression a mask of cool, detached authority. We were no longer the naive dropout and the rising executive. I was a titan of industry, and he was a pathetic trespasser standing in the middle of my kingdom. Marcus stopped struggling against the security guards the exact moment his sunken eyes locked onto mine. He quickly adjusted his wrinkled jacket, stood up straighter, and completely shifted his entire demeanor. The desperate shouting trespasser vanished, and he immediately attempted to slip back into the smooth, manipulative charm he had used to control me all those years ago. "Maya, baby," he said, his voice loud enough to carry across the quiet lobby, ensuring my shocked employees could hear every single word. "You look absolutely incredible. I have missed you so much." I did not flinch. I did not smile. I simply stared at him with eyes as cold as glacial ice. He took a tentative step forward, holding his hands up in a placating, entirely fake gesture. "I know we have had our differences in the past," he continued, projecting the false image of a deeply misunderstood, loving partner. "But I am so incredibly proud of what you have built. I always knew you had it in you. I have been trying to reach you for months, but your people keep shutting me out. I just wanted to see my beautiful wife and celebrate this massive milestone together." He was intentionally playing to the audience, expertly trying to gaslight me right in front of my own loyal staff. He wanted them to believe I was the cruel, cold-hearted woman who had ruthlessly banished her supportive, loving husband from sharing in her ultimate success. He fully expected me to panic, to quickly usher him into a private room to avoid a public, highly embarrassing scene. Instead, I crossed my arms over my chest and let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. "Wife?" I repeated, my voice calm, projecting clearly and cleanly through the dead silent lobby. "That is a highly interesting choice of words, Marcus. Considering you shoved divorce papers onto my bleeding lap 15 years ago while our premature daughter was fighting for her life in an incubator. Considering you completely emptied our joint bank account and left me with exactly $12.40 to my name. Nah. A collective quiet gasp rippled through the gathered employees. Marcus's fake charming smile faltered slightly, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He had severely miscalculated my willingness to air our dirty laundry in public. I had absolutely nothing to hide. He had everything to lose. "Come on, Maya, let us talk about this in private," he muttered, stepping closer and dropping his voice to an urgent, harsh whisper. "Do not make a massive scene right before your big day." "I am not making a scene, Marcus. I am simply clarifying the historical record," I replied smoothly, holding my ground. "I do not need a private meeting to figure out why you are suddenly crawling back into my life exactly 24 hours before Origin goes public. I already know exactly why you are here." He blinked, genuinely caught off guard. "You do not know anything." "I know absolutely everything," I countered, taking a single commanding step toward him. "I know that your highly publicized tech logistics startup completely imploded 3 years ago because of your severe financial mismanagement. I know that your lavish corporate lifestyle was entirely funded by predatory loans you can no longer afford to pay back. I know that your beautiful, expensive mistress Chloe realized the money was running out 6 months ago. She systematically drained your remaining personal accounts, packed her Chanel bags, and ran off to Miami with her personal trainer." Marcus's face drained of all color. His jaw dropped open, but no words came out. The polished facade was cracking rapidly, revealing the terrified, ruined man underneath. "But worst of all, Marcus," I continued, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register that only he could hear clearly. "I know that you are exactly 2 weeks away from formally filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Your luxury condo is currently in active foreclosure. Your luxury car was repossessed last Tuesday, and you are desperately drowning in a sea of insurmountable debt. You are a completely broken man. You came here hoping to squeeze a quick, quiet payout out of me to save your pathetic life." The sudden, shocking exposure of his deepest, darkest secrets shattered his charming illusion completely. The fake loving husband act vanished instantly. His posture grew rigid, his hands balling into tight, aggressive fists at his sides. The raw, unfiltered hatred he had always harbored for me finally boiled over, twisting his aged features into a mask of pure vicious rage. "You arrogant, ungrateful witch!" he spat, his voice trembling with furious indignation. "You think you are so incredibly untouchable sitting up in your glass tower? You think you can just dismiss me like trash? I built the foundation of your confidence. I am the sole reason you even had the drive to prove yourself. You owe me for this success, Maya. Every single dime of it exists because of me." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied coldly, signaling for my security team to step forward and finally remove him from the premises. "Wait!" Marcus shouted frantically, reaching inside the breast pocket of his frayed suit jacket. The security guards immediately tensed, grabbing his arms, but he managed to pull out a crumpled, heavily folded legal document. He held it up triumphantly like a prized trophy, a manic, desperate gleam lighting up his sunken eyes. "You might not think you owe me anything, Maya, but the federal legal system strongly disagrees." He sneered, his confidence suddenly returning in a massive, overwhelming wave. I gestured for the guards to pause, mildly curious about what pathetic, fabricated trick he was attempting to play. "What is that, Marcus?" "This," he said, waving the paper aggressively in the air, "is a certified legal discovery from the state of Maryland. Do you remember those divorce papers you signed in the hospital? The ones I supposedly filed 15 years ago? Well, it turns out my lawyer at the time made a massive, catastrophic clerical error. He failed to submit the final supplementary forms to the county clerk." He took a step closer, a sickening, victorious grin stretching across his face. "The state of Maryland never finalized our divorce, Maya. The paperwork was entirely voided. We are still legally, completely and happily married." The silence in the lobby became absolutely deafening. I stared at him, my expression completely unchanged as he delivered his ultimate threat. "Since we are still legally married, every single thing you have built over the last 15 years is legally considered a marital asset," Marcus declared loudly, ensuring the entire room heard his triumphant claim. "That means I am legally entitled to exactly 50% of Origin. Now I have a very close friend who works as a senior reporter at the Wall Street Journal. I have an exclusive, explosive interview scheduled with him for tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. If I go public with this massive legal dispute, your precious billion-dollar IPO will be completely halted by the Securities and Exchange Commission. The scandal will tank your company valuation overnight." He crossed his arms, looking at me with pure malicious greed. "You have a choice, Maya. You can write me a check for $50 million right now to quietly walk away and finalize the divorce properly, or I can burn your entire beautiful empire straight to the ground tomorrow morning." He stood there panting slightly, expecting me to completely fall apart. He expected me to beg, to panic, to frantically negotiate a settlement to protect my life's work. Instead, I simply sighed, reached into the pocket of my blazer, and pulled out a sleek, solid black electronic keycard. I looked at the piece of paper in his hand, then looked him dead in the eyes. I let out a soft, highly amused chuckle. I did not call my lawyers. I did not call the police. I raised my hand and signaled my elite security team to completely back away. They immediately stepped aside, leaving Marcus standing confused in the center of the lobby. I tossed the solid black keycard directly at his chest. He fumbled and caught it clumsily. "You want half of the company, Marcus?" I asked, my voice dripping with dark, lethal amusement. "That is a very bold, highly ambitious demand. Unfortunately for you, I cannot authorize that transfer. I only own 49% of Origin. If you genuinely want to claim 50% of this corporate empire, you are going to have to negotiate directly with the 51% majority shareholder." Marcus looked down at the black keycard in his hand. It had a specific address printed in silver lettering on the back. He looked back up at me, his eyes narrowing in sudden confusion. "The majority shareholder. Who is that?" I smiled, turning my back on him and walking slowly toward my private elevator. "The 51% majority shareholder is our daughter Zarya. She is waiting for you at the address on that card." As the gleaming silver elevator doors began to slide shut, I caught one final glimpse of Marcus. The confusion on his face had completely melted away, instantly replaced by a massive, predatory grin. He looked at the keycard, clearly believing he had just won the ultimate lottery. He thought he was about to walk into a room and easily manipulate a naive, impressionable 15-year-old girl into handing over a $1 billion fortune. He had absolutely no idea he was walking straight into a deadly trap. Marcus gripped the worn, sticky steering wheel of his cheap rental sedan, his knuckles turning stark white as he aggressively navigated the dense, crawling afternoon traffic of downtown Atlanta. A giddy, almost hysterical laugh bubbled up in the back of his throat, completely unbidden. He could not believe his absolute, undeniable luck. Maya had always been a brilliant, world-class chemist, but he had always known she was a profound, emotional fool when it came to the ruthless mechanics of business. Handing the absolute majority control of a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire to a 15-year-old girl was the most reckless, amateur, and beautifully catastrophic mistake she could have possibly made. He mentally calculated the staggering, life-altering wealth that was now practically resting in his open, waiting palms. 51% of a company about to launch a historic initial public offering meant he would not just clear his suffocating debts, he would instantly become a billionaire by the end of the week. He glanced down at the sleek, solid black keycard resting innocently on the stained passenger seat, verifying the specific address, glowing brightly on his phone, GPS. He fully expected the automated robotic voice to guide him toward an elite ivy-covered prep school in Buckhead, an exclusive equestrian training center, or perhaps a highly guarded private country club where wealthy, privileged teenagers spent their idle afternoons. He spent the entire agonizing drive meticulously rehearsing his flawless performance. He would play the tragic, heartbroken, relentlessly searching father. He would squeeze out a few genuine-looking tears drop to his trembling knees, if the situation required it, and weave a masterful, devastating tale of how Maya had cruelly, systematically banished him from their lives. He knew exactly how to manipulate the desperate, yearning, fragile heart of a fatherless teenage girl. But the GPS did not lead him to a lush, manicured campus filled with laughing children. Instead, the robotic voice directed him away from the wealthy suburbs and straight toward a stark, heavily industrialized sector on the far, gritty outskirts of the city. He pulled up to a massive, windowless fortress constructed entirely of brutalist concrete and dark, reflective, bulletproof glass. There were no playing fields, no tennis courts, and no sweeping driveways. There was only a towering, electrified perimeter fence topped with thick, angled razor wire and a fiercely illuminated, imposing sign that read, Origin Cybernetics and Data Vault. Marcus frowned deeply, wiping a sudden cold bead of nervous sweat from his receding hairline. This was not a playground. This was a high-tech, military-grade cybersecurity data center. He parked the rattling sedan, straightened his frayed, cheap navy tie, and approached the imposing solid steel front doors. He swiped the black keycard against the glowing red security terminal. The heavy doors unlatched instantly with a loud, intimidating hiss of pressurized air. He stepped inside, instantly enveloped by the freezing, aggressively climate-controlled environment of a sterile, completely empty reception area. He practiced his mournful, remorseful dad expression in the reflection of the reinforced glass security partition, forcing his sunken eyes to look appropriately sorrowful and deeply emotionally wounded. He swiped the card again at the inner reinforced elevator, watching the digital numbers drop rapidly as the car descended deep into a hidden subterranean sublevel. He was ready to play the greatest, most profitable, and most important role of his entire pathetic life. The heavy steel elevator doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, cavernous server room, illuminated entirely by the harsh, pulsing blue and vibrant green neon lights of massive, towering mainframes. The deafening, rhythmic, endless hum of thousands of synchronized industrial cooling fans filled the frigid, sterile air. It felt exactly like stepping directly into the digital, beating heart of a massive, sentient machine. Marcus shivered violently, wrapping his thin, wrinkled suit jacket tighter around his narrow shoulders as he stepped cautiously onto the raised, grated metal floorboards. He found her sitting exactly at the very center of the vast technological labyrinth. Zarya was not playing with dolls, watching trivial makeup tutorials, or texting high school friends. She was seated in a highly ergonomic custom-built command chair, completely and utterly surrounded by a towering curved array of 6 massive high-definition monitors. Continuous streams of complex, rapidly scrolling data and encrypted code reflected intensely in the dark anti-glare lenses of her glasses. Her fingers flew across a specialized mechanical keyboard with terrifying blur-inducing and flawless speed. She had clearly inherited every single ounce of her mother's terrifying world, altering unstoppable genius, but she had not applied it to cellular biology or botanical chemistry. Zarya had conquered the invisible, infinite, and powerful realm of silicon global algorithms and massive data networks. She was a supreme, undisputed technological prodigy guarding the digital gates of the Origen Empire with absolute authority. Marcus swallowed hard, heavily intimidated by the sheer aggressive and laser-sharp focus radiating from the teenager. But $1 billion was on the line, and he was out of time. He plastered on his most tragic, devastated, and loving expression and stepped directly into her line of sight. "Zarya, my beautiful, beautiful girl," he choked out, forcing his voice to tremble with heavy, manufactured and desperate emotion. She did not flinch. She did not gasp. She did not even break her blistering, relentless typing speed. She simply kept her eyes locked on the scrolling code, completely and utterly ignoring his highly dramatic entrance. Marcus took a hesitant, calculated step closer, clasping his hands together in a pleading, desperately theatrical gesture. "I know you probably do not recognize me at all," he continued, projecting deep, fabricated sorrow over the hum of the servers. "I am your father, Zarya. I have missed you so incredibly, unbelievably much. You have absolutely no idea the absolute, crushing agony I have been in every single day since you were born." He waited eagerly for a reaction, a tear, a sudden question. Nothing. The sharp mechanical clacking of the keyboard remained perfectly rhythmically and coldly constant. "Your mother. She is a very complicated, difficult woman," Marcus pressed on, leaning heavily into his practiced, venomous lie. "She kept us apart, Zarya. She had the expensive corporate lawyers, the immense power, and the endless money. I was just a regular, loving man trying to fight a ruthless billionaire. I tried to find you. I sent countless letters, I made thousands of phone calls. I begged her on my knees to let me see my only daughter, but she built an impenetrable wall around you. She deliberately poisoned your mind against me because she selfishly wanted you all to herself. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry I was not strong enough to break through her cruel lies until today." Zarya allowed him to completely spin his pathetic, intricate, and desperate web of deceit. She let him talk, her face completely and utterly unreadable, a flawless, perfectly constructed mask of absolute ice. She did not offer a single nod of validation, a solitary blink of sympathy, or a minor shift in posture. She just let the heavy, desperate, humiliating silence stretch out between his blatant lies, forcing him to keep talking, to keep digging his own grave deeper and deeper into the freezing concrete floor. Sensing that the emotional, heartbroken father angle was hitting a solid, unyielding brick wall, Marcus quickly and clumsily pivoted to the grift. He took another bold step forward, trying desperately to project a commanding, protective, and vital paternal authority. "Listen to me very carefully, Zarya. The corporate world is an incredibly dangerous, vicious, and unforgiving place," he warned, his tone shifting to urgent, manufactured, and highly manipulative concern. "Your mother is making a massive, catastrophic mistake with this IPO tomorrow morning. The greedy venture capitalists, the ruthless board members, the Wall Street sharks, they are all going to try to completely tear you both apart. You are just a teenager. You should be enjoying your youth shopping and having fun, not carrying the crushing weight of $1 billion corporate target on your back. You need a fierce, experienced protector. You need a father to step in and aggressively shield you from these corporate wolves." He reached eagerly into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a fresh, cleanly printed legal document he had hastily, frantically drafted in his rental car. "All you have to do is sign this single, simple piece of paper, right here," Marcus coaxed, offering her a silver pen with a warm, highly encouraging and predatory smile. It is just a standard temporary proxy voting transfer. It temporarily assigns your 51% voting rights directly to me. It does not take away your money or your ownership. It just legally allows me to sit in that boardroom tomorrow morning and fiercely fight your mother's enemies on your behalf. Let me be the shield you have always needed, Zarya. Let me finally protect our family. Zarya finally stopped typing. The sudden sharp and absolute cessation of the mechanical keyboard clacking made the massive server room feel suffocatingly quiet. She slowly, deliberately lowered her hands to her lap. She smoothly rotated her high-tech command chair, turning completely away from the glowing screens to fully face the pathetic man who had ruthlessly abandoned her in a neonatal intensive care unit 15 years ago. She looked him slowly up and down, taking in his frayed suit, his desperate leaning posture, and his pathetic trembling hands holding the fake document. Her dark eyes were piercing, utterly devoid of any childhood innocence, and significantly colder than the freezing, aggressively circulated air whipping through the towering server racks. She reached out completely, ignoring the silver pen and the fraudulent proxy document entirely. Instead, she firmly grabbed the edge of her central largest high-definition monitor and smoothly swiveled it around so it directly faced Marcus. "That is a highly touching, deeply emotional story," Zarya said, her voice chillingly calm, carrying the exact same razor-sharp, lethal, and unshakable cadence as her mother. "So please explain to me why the specific IP address of your prepaid, untraceable burner phone was actively caught trying to hack our secure internal mainframe and illegally sell our proprietary IPO source code to Dermacorp at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning last night." The dead silence in the frigid server room stretched out for 5 agonizing seconds. Marcus froze completely. The fake paternal warmth melted right off his face, dripping away to reveal the hollow, vicious predator beneath. His shoulders squared and the pathetic trembling in his hands abruptly stopped. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed unpleasantly against the towering metal server racks. There was no more point in pretending. The heartbroken father routine was dead, killed instantly by a 15-year-old girl who saw straight through his soul. He reached up, roughly loosened his frayed tie, and glared at her with pure, unadulterated malice. "You are exactly like your arrogant mother," Marcus sneered, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly register. "You think you are so brilliant sitting in this little freezing cave. You think you hold all the cards, but you are just a kid playing a grown-up game." "Richard Thorne from Dermacorp found me, Zarya. He bought up every single one of my massive debts. He owns me entirely, and by tomorrow morning he is going to own Origin. Dermacorp has spent 15 years bleeding out, constantly losing market share to your mother's empire. They know Maya built a proprietary predictive supply chain algorithm that makes your manufacturing process completely unbeatable. They desperately want it, and they paid me $5 million in clean, untraceable cash to walk into this building, use my legal marital status as a shield, and personally extract it from your isolated offline servers. They have been planning this specific corporate espionage for years, waiting for the exact moment you were most vulnerable." Marcus lunged forward with sudden, terrifying speed fueled by years of bitter inadequacy and blinding resentment. He violently kicked a heavy metal stool out of his way, the loud crash ringing sharply through the room. He slammed both of his hands down hard on the edge of Zarya's sleek command desk, leaning his entire body weight over her. He effectively trapped her between the massive console and the humming, vibrating server rack directly behind her. His face was inches from hers, his breath smelling foul and sour in the sterile, heavily filtered air. "I am not leaving this subterranean vault without the physical master drive," Marcus threatened, his eyes wide and manic with raw greed. "Your mother humiliated me. She left me with absolutely nothing while she built a multi-billion-dollar kingdom on my back. I am taking my rightful piece tonight, no matter what I have to do to you to get it. You are completely alone down here. Your security guards are 5 floors up. It is just you and me. Hand over the silver decryption drive containing the core algorithm right now, or I swear I will tear this entire console apart and forcefully take it myself. Do not test me, little girl. I have absolutely nothing left to lose, which makes me the most dangerous man you will ever meet in your short, privileged, pathetic life." Zarya knew exactly how to play this. She was a master of psychological chess trained by the very woman who had single-handedly dismantled the entire mainstream beauty industry. Zarya deliberately let her shoulders slump. She forced her breathing to become rapid, shallow, and highly erratic. She widened her dark eyes, filling them with a perfect, convincing manifestation of sheer, unadulterated terror. She pressed her spine hard against the freezing metal grid of the server rack, physically shrinking away from his looming, aggressive presence. She allowed her lower lip to tremble just enough to sell the flawless performance of a frightened, helpless child facing a violent, unhinged threat. "Please do not hurt me," Zarya whispered, her voice cracking with a fragile, beautiful vulnerability. "I do not want any trouble, I swear. Just take it. Take whatever you want. Take the company's secrets, and please just leave me alone so I can go back to my mother." She reached a shaking hand slowly under the thick lip of her polished desk. Her fingers purposefully grazed a hidden biometric compartment designed for catastrophic scenarios. The small panel clicked open with a muted electronic hum. She pulled out a sleek, heavy, brushed silver flash drive. It pulsed with a singular, ominous red LED light resembling a tiny mechanical heartbeat. She held it out toward him, her hand vibrating with carefully manufactured fear. Marcus did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He aggressively snatched the silver drive right out of her trembling palm, his fingernails harshly scraping against her skin in his frantic haste. He held the heavy piece of metal up to the neon blue lights of the servers, his greedy eyes shining with absolute intoxicating triumph. He let out a loud, victorious sigh, sliding the priceless device securely into his inner jacket pocket, patting it twice to ensure it was safe. "You are so incredibly weak," Marcus mocked, his tone dripping with absolute disgust and boundless arrogance. "You put up a tough, unshakable front, but the second someone actually challenges you, you completely fold under the pressure. You are exactly like Maya. She was weak, emotional, and pathetic 15 years ago, crying in that damp hospital room, and you are just as pathetic right now. You both think you are invincible titans of industry, but you are just fragile women hiding behind expensive glass walls and hired muscle." He stepped back from the desk, straightening his ruined jacket, radiating the smug, obnoxious confidence of a man who firmly believed he had just successfully conquered the entire world. "When the stock markets open tomorrow morning, Dermacorp is going to upload this proprietary algorithm directly into their own network," Marcus gloated, pointing a harsh, accusing finger directly at her face. "They are going to completely hijack your manufacturing models and steal your distribution routes. Origen's stock will absolutely plummet. Your historic IPO will instantly burn to worthless ash, and I will be sitting on a private beach in the Caribbean with $50 million in my bank account. Tell your brilliant, untouchable mother that her biggest, most fatal mistake was completely underestimating the desperate man she left behind to rot. Tell her Marcus finally won the war and she lost everything." Marcus spun on his heel and bolted. He sprinted frantically across the raised metal floorboards, his heavy footsteps clanging loudly against the quiet hum of the machinery. He slammed his hand against the exit terminal. The heavy steel doors hissed open instantly, and he threw himself into the waiting elevator, desperately smashing the lobby button. As the steel doors sealed shut, the automated, high-security systems of the data vault instantly detected the unauthorized physical removal of a localized hardware device. A harsh, silent alarm immediately triggered. The ambient blue lighting in the cavernous room flashed to a violent, strobing crimson red. The massive digital monitors above the console flashed bright, urgent warning messages regarding a critical, catastrophic security breach. Zarya stood up slowly from her command chair. The fragile, terrified, trembling teenager completely evaporated into the freezing air. Her posture straightened into a line of absolute, rigid steel. The manufactured fear vanished from her dark eyes, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly predatory calm. She cracked her knuckles, her face a mask of supreme, chilling control. Her fingers hit the mechanical keyboard with explosive, blinding speed. She completely bypassed the automated lockdown protocols that were attempting to seal the building. She actively overrode the reinforced blast doors in the upper lobby, ensuring they remained wide open and completely unlocked. She brought up the external security feeds on her central monitor, watching with cold, detached amusement as Marcus sprinted out of the main glass doors, completely uncontested, and practically threw himself into his cheap rental sedan. He sped away into the dark Atlanta night, clutching what he believed was the ultimate key to a billion-dollar kingdom. 10 seconds later, the heavy doors to the subterranean server room violently burst open. Vance, the massive, heavily armed lead security officer for the Origen building, rushed into the freezing room. He was breathless, his weapon drawn and held at the low ready, his tactical gear shifting loudly as he aggressively scanned the massive vault for any remaining threats. He saw Zarya standing perfectly unharmed by the central console and immediately holstered his weapon, his face tight with intense confusion and rising panic. "Miss Zarya, are you all right?" Vance demanded, rushing over to her desk and frantically checking the perimeter. The silent perimeter alarms tripped, but the automated building lockdown was manually overridden from this exact terminal. I saw the trespasser sprinting out of the front gates on the monitors. Why did the system let him leave? Why did you let him escape the building with the physical master drive? He just walked out of here with the entire core data algorithm that powers our entire global infrastructure. We have to call the federal authorities and initiate a massive manhunt right now before he reaches Richard Thorne. Zarya did not panic. She did not yell. She simply smiled, a slow, dark, and utterly ruthless grin that flawlessly mirrored her mother's sheer corporate brutality. She was not a victim. She was the architect of their final demise. Her fingers flew across the keyboard one final time, bringing up a complex, heavily encrypted tracking program on the main screen, watching a small red dot speed away on a digital map of the city. "He did not take the core data," Vance Zarya stated, her voice echoing through the massive servers with absolute terrifying certainty. "He took a localized, highly aggressive self-executing EMP virus, perfectly disguised as our proprietary supply chain algorithm. It is a piece of malware I coded myself just for this occasion." When the desperate, greedy executives at Dermacorp blindly plug that silver drive into their central mainframe tomorrow morning to steal our secrets, it is going to completely, irreversibly, and permanently wipe their entire global research and development database. Every patent, every formula, every shred of their digital existence will be eradicated. They are going to lose decades of their own stolen work in a matter of seconds. Let them burn. While Zarya watched the digital inferno unfold in the subterranean data vault, a completely different type of threat was breaching the perimeter of my private residence across town. My sprawling, heavily fortified estate in the wealthy enclave of Buckhead was usually a sanctuary of absolute tranquility. The towering wrought iron gates and elite security personnel were designed to keep the chaotic, desperate world firmly outside my manicured lawns. But desperation breeds a very specific kind of reckless ingenuity. Chloe had always been a parasite, a woman who expertly attached herself to whatever host provided the most lavish lifestyle. She had drained Marcus of his final remaining assets, packed her designer bags, and supposedly fled to Miami with her personal trainer. But the Miami money had clearly run dry much faster than she anticipated. She needed a new host, or at least a massive, unearned payout to fund her next grift. She bypassed my outer security gate by aggressively tailgating a massive floral delivery truck, slipping her rented convertible through the heavy iron doors, just fractions of a second before they sealed shut. She bypassed the intercom, ignored the clear warning signs, and parked recklessly on the edge of my pristine, crushed stone driveway. I was sitting in my expansive sunlit formal garden, going over the final logistical reports for the initial public offering. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and expensive orchids. I wore a simple but flawlessly tailored silk robe, enjoying a rare moment of complete silence before the impending corporate storm. The sharp, obnoxious crunch of high heels on stone shattered the quiet morning. I did not even look up from my documents as Chloe stomped aggressively onto the stone patio, breathing heavily, her face flushed with a mixture of panic and manufactured distress. The years had not been kind to the woman who had happily helped Marcus destroy my life. Her expensive, chemically maintained youth was fading rapidly, replaced by a harsh, brittle desperation. Her designer clothes looked slightly out of season, slightly worn, betraying the severe financial freefall she was currently experiencing. "Maya, you have to listen to me!" Chloe gasped, throwing herself onto the plush outdoor sofa opposite my chair. She completely ignored standard social boundaries, launching instantly into a highly dramatic, perfectly rehearsed theatrical performance. She buried her face in her hands, forcing out loud, racking, utterly fake sobs. I slowly placed my documents on the glass table. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not ask her if she was okay. I just watched her perform my face a mask of absolute glacial indifference. "It was all Marcus," she cried, looking up at me with wide, heavily mascaraed eyes, trying desperately to summon a single genuine tear. "You have to believe me, Maya. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to be the other woman. He forced me into everything 15 years ago. He was so powerful back then, so incredibly manipulative. He threatened to ruin my entire career if I did not go along with his horrible plans. I was just a naive, terrified young girl, and he completely brainwashed me. I have lived in absolute crushing agony every single day since then, knowing what he did to you and your beautiful baby." She paused, clearly expecting me to soften, to offer a word of sympathetic understanding, or perhaps relate to her fabricated tale of male manipulation. She wanted to build a bridge of shared victimhood, a pathetic alliance forged in the dark shadow of my ex-husband. She severely misjudged her audience. This was a dark revenge meticulously plotted over a decade and a half, and she was merely a minor insignificant casualty in the final act. I reached forward and gracefully lifted my delicate porcelain teacup. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the imported Earl Grey, savoring the rich bergamot flavor. I set the cup back down on its matching saucer with a soft, perfectly controlled clink. "That is a fascinating revision of historical events," Chloe, I replied smoothly, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Considering I vividly remember you laughing directly in my face outside the hospital room while holding the keys to the Mercedes Marcus bought you with my drained savings account. Your definition of being a naive, terrified victim is highly creative." Her fake tears vanished instantly. The dramatic sobbing victim act evaporated entirely, replaced by the cold, calculating extortionist she truly was. She dropped her hands, her posture straightening as she aggressively leaned across the glass table. "Fine. Let us drop the emotional act." Chloe snapped, her voice losing its frantic edge and dropping into a harsh transactional tone. "Let us talk about reality, Maya. Let us talk about the fact that Marcus is currently running around the city desperately trying to leverage a massive, unfinalized divorce technicality to steal half of your billion-dollar company. He is completely unhinged. He is manic, he is broke, and he is going to create a massive, incredibly public and extremely embarrassing scandal right before your historic IPO. He is going to drag the Origen name straight through the absolute filthiest mud he can find." She crossed her arms, a triumphant, greedy gleam sparking in her eyes. "But I can stop him. I know absolutely every single one of his dirty, pathetic secrets. I know about the predatory loans, the offshore shell accounts, the illegal wire transfers, and the vicious corporate espionage he is actively planning against your company right now. I have the physical receipts, Maya. I have the emails, the audio recordings, and the bank statements." She paused, letting her threat hang heavily in the fragrant garden air, waiting for me to take the bait. "I am offering you a very simple, highly lucrative business transaction," Chloe declared, her confidence swelling as she laid out her ultimate demand. "You write me a certified, untraceable cashier's check for exactly $500,000 right now. $500,000 is absolutely nothing to you. It is pocket change. You give me the money to start my life over completely clean, and I will personally walk into any federal courtroom you want. I will stand before a judge and happily publicly testify against Marcus. I will hand over every single piece of evidence you need to lock him away for corporate espionage and fraud. You pay me, and I will permanently neutralize your biggest problem before he can even launch his attack." I poured myself another half cup of tea, the steaming amber liquid cascading smoothly from the silver spout. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to sit in the uncomfortable mounting tension. She was practically vibrating with nervous energy, her greedy eyes tracking my every single movement, waiting for me to frantically grab a checkbook and meet her demands. She genuinely believed she had backed a billionaire into a tight, inescapable corner. $500,000, I repeated quietly, testing the words on my tongue, as if considering the merit of her incredibly bold proposal. You want me to pay you $500,000 for your absolute loyalty and your flawless, unimpeachable testimony? Exactly, Chloe said, a wide, victorious smile stretching across her face. It is a win for both of us. You get rid of Marcus, and I get the fresh start I deserve. I smiled back, but there was no warmth in my expression. It was a cold, predatory baring of teeth. I reached to the side of my chair and casually picked up my sleek silver iPad. I tapped the screen once, unlocking it, and smoothly slid the device across the glass table until it rested directly in front of her. Before we finalize any massive life-altering financial transactions, Chloe, I think we should thoroughly review your current reliability as a trustworthy witness, I suggested smoothly. Press play on the video. Chloe frowned in deep confusion, her triumphant smile faltering. She looked down at the bright screen, hesitantly extending a manicured finger to tap the play icon. The screen instantly flared to life, displaying a crystal-clear, high-definition, full-color security feed. The timestamp in the bottom corner indicated the footage was captured exactly 10 minutes prior. The camera angle perfectly covered my grand, formal living room, the exact space Chloe had occupied while waiting for my security team to locate me in the gardens. The footage showed Chloe standing alone in the center of the lavishly decorated room. It clearly documented her looking nervously over her shoulder, checking the hallway to ensure she was entirely unobserved. It then showed her swiftly, expertly approaching a polished antique display cabinet. With practiced, flawless precision, the video captured her, opening her oversized designer purse, grabbing a small, heavily encrusted Fabergé clock, an irreplaceable, priceless family heirloom worth roughly $200,000, and smoothly slipping it directly into the depths of her bag before snapping the clasp shut. Chloe froze completely. All the blood instantly drained from her heavily contoured face, leaving her looking sickly pale and utterly terrified. Her mouth dropped open, but her vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. She stared at the looping video, watching herself commit grand larceny in brilliant, undeniable high definition. You have incredible audacity, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal quiet whisper. You illegally bypass my security trespass on my private estate, demand $500,000 to protect me from the very man you helped destroy me with, and you do it all with a stolen priceless heirloom currently sitting in the purse resting right next to your feet. If I call the Atlanta Police Department right now, you will not just be arrested for trespassing and extortion. You will be facing a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for grand theft. She began to violently tremble, her hands shaking as she instinctively pulled her large purse closer to her chest. Maya, I can explain, she stammered, her voice high and breathless with genuine crushing panic. I did not mean to. It was just a mistake. I will put it back right now. Please, please do not call the police. I will do anything you want. I did not reach for my phone. I did not signal the elite security team I knew was currently standing just out of sight behind the patio doors, waiting for my single command. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my silk robe and pulled out a thick, heavily bound legal contract, dropping it onto the glass table with a heavy, authoritative thud. I am not going to call the police, Chloe, I said, leaning back in my chair and observing her utter terror with mild, detached satisfaction. In fact, I am going to let you keep the clock. Consider it a minor down payment for a very specific delivery service. Chloe blinked, completely derailed by the sudden massive shift in my tactics. What delivery service? I slid the thick legal contract across the smooth glass until it touched the edge of her iPad. This is an airtight, irrevocable settlement agreement, I explained coldly. I want you to take this document directly to Marcus. You know exactly where he is hiding. I want you to tell him that tomorrow night I am hosting the final exclusive pre-IPO gala at the historic Fox Theater in Midtown. Tell him that if he puts on a tuxedo, walks through the front doors of the Fox Theater, and publicly signs this exact document in front of my board of directors, waiving any and all fabricated claims to Origin, and finalizing our divorce permanently, I will personally hand him a certified check for $10 million. Chloe stared at the thick stack of paper, her panicked mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the numbers I was casually throwing around. $10 million, she breathed, her eyes widening with a renewed ferocious surge of unadulterated greed. $10 million to completely disappear from my life forever? I confirmed, locking my eyes onto hers. And if you successfully deliver this message and ensure he actually shows up at the gala tomorrow night to sign it, I will wire that $500,000 you just demanded directly into any offshore account you choose. Chloe grabbed the thick contract with shaking, eager hands, pulling it tightly against her chest alongside her stolen treasure. The terror of impending arrest completely vanished instantly, replaced by the intoxicating, blinding thrill of a massive payday. She genuinely believed she had just outsmarted a billionaire. She thought she was holding the ultimate winning lottery ticket, completely oblivious to the fact that she was merely carrying a primed grenade directly back into Marcus's desperate hands. I will make sure he is there, Maya, Chloe promised, her voice breathless with excitement, already calculating her escape route. I swear to you he will be at the Fox Theater tomorrow night. I am absolutely counting on it, I replied, offering her a final chilling smile. Now get off my property before I change my mind about the police. The heavy iron gates of my estate clanged shut behind Chloe's rented convertible as she sped away, completely oblivious to her role as a disposable pawn. Across town, in a deeply depressing fluorescent-lit motel room off the interstate, Marcus aggressively paced the stained, threadbare carpet. He clutched the silver flash drive in his sweaty palm, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was already spending the massive Dermacorp payout in his head, mentally browsing luxury real estate and custom sports cars. The flimsy motel door rattled loudly and slammed open. Chloe strutted inside, practically vibrating with manic, unearned energy. She tossed her stolen, priceless Fabergé clock onto the cheap polyester bedspread, followed immediately by the thick stack of legal documents I had provided. Marcus stopped pacing, his greedy eyes locking onto the papers. What is this? He demanded, snatching the contract from the bed. Chloe quickly spun a masterful, completely fabricated web of lies, entirely omitting the highly embarrassing part where she was caught stealing on high-definition security cameras. Instead, she painted herself as a brilliant, terrifying negotiator. I completely cornered her, Marcus, Chloe bragged, pouring herself a glass of cheap warm wine from a plastic bottle. I walked right up to her in her fancy garden and laid out all our cards. I terrified her. She knows you have the power to ruin her precious public offering tomorrow. She is absolutely terrified of a public scandal. She gave me this settlement contract. She is offering a $10 million buyout. Marcus stared at the thick document, his jaw dropping open. 10 million. 10 million in clean, certified cash. Chloe confirmed, her eyes wide with intoxicating greed. But there is a catch. You have to show up at her massive pre-IPO gala at the Fox Theater tomorrow night. You have to put on a tuxedo, walk right into the middle of her board of directors, and publicly sign away your marital claims. She wants the public humiliation of forcing you to bow out in front of her corporate friends. But who cares about her petty pride? We are getting $10 million. Plus, I secured a little $500,000 consulting fee for myself just for brokering the piece. Marcus let out a loud, triumphant roar, grabbing Chloe and spinning her around the cramped, foul-smelling room. They celebrated their supposed absolute genius, completely convinced they were the smartest predators in the city. In his highly arrogant mind, Marcus had executed a perfect, flawless checkmate. He held the key to destroying my company with the Dermacorp deal, and now he had a guaranteed massive cash buyout waiting for him on a silver platter. He was a corporate king holding court in a moldy-infested motel room, totally unaware the guillotine was already dropping. Back within the impenetrable glass and steel walls of the Origin Tower, the atmosphere was a stark, beautiful contrast to their pathetic, scrambling greed. Zaria and I stood side by side in my private top-floor executive suite, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city was ours, built from the ground up with our blood, our sweat, and our undeniable, unstoppable brilliance. I looked at my daughter, taking in her sharp, highly intelligent eyes, her flawless posture, and the quiet, absolute power she naturally radiated. We were the living, breathing embodiment of Black excellence. We had not begged, borrowed, or stolen our way to the top of the corporate food chain. We had aggressively engineered it, flawlessly coded it, and fiercely forged it out of nothing but our own raw intellect and unshakable resilience. Zaria tapped a few rapid commands into the secure tablet resting on my glass desk, bringing up the localized tracking software she had covertly embedded deep into the physical casing of the silver flash drive. The red beacon blinked steadily, currently stationary, at a highly guarded corporate address downtown. It was the Dermacorp central headquarters. She looked up at me, a fiercely proud, lethal smile mirroring my own expression. "The trap is perfectly set." "Mother," she said, her voice smooth, confident and dripping with lethal authority. "Dermacorp has the drive. As for Marcus, the proxy documents you gave Chloe contain a highly complex, deeply buried subclause hidden within pages of impenetrable legal jargon. By signing it publicly tomorrow night, he does not just waive his fabricated marital claims. He legally confesses to organized corporate espionage, willingly admits to federal extortion, and permanently forfeits all remaining personal and future assets to our legal department to cover the punitive damages. He is willingly signing his own financial death warrant." I wrapped my arm tightly around her shoulders, pulling her close, feeling a profound, unbreakable bond with the brilliant young woman standing beside me. I had raised a warrior. "They thought we were weak, Zaria," I said quietly, my voice vibrating with fierce pride. "They thought our success was an accident they could easily exploit. They looked at two Black women and saw easy targets. Tonight, we show them exactly what happens when parasites attempt to bleed a titan. We are going to sever their lifelines and watch them drown in their own unchecked arrogance." The morning of the historic IPO gala broke with bright, unforgiving, and blinding sunlight. Deep inside the sterile, highly restricted underground server rooms of Dermacorp, an arrogant, severely overpaid chief technology officer eagerly took the silver flash drive from a secure courier. He was entirely blinded by the promise of stealing our revolutionary market-dominating algorithm. He bypassed all standard quarantine protocols and ignored his own firewall warnings. He plugged the device directly into their central unprotected mainframe. The exact second the metal connectors touched, a silent, invisible digital clock began aggressively ticking down. Zaria's secure tablet chimed softly in our penthouse, a sweet melodic confirmation that the payload was actively spreading through their massive global network like a terminal illness. Dermacorp had just swallowed the poison pill, and their absolute, undeniable destruction was now mathematically inevitable. The countdown to their digital eradication had officially begun. Across the city, Marcus stood in front of a cracked, foggy mirror in his motel bathroom. He carefully adjusted the crooked bow tie of his cheap, poorly fitted rented tuxedo. He smoothed his thinning gray hair, flashing a wide, predatory, and deeply unearned grin at his own reflection. He genuinely believed he was looking at a self-made billionaire, a masterful conqueror of the corporate world. He stepped out of the bathroom, joining Chloe, who was squeezed into a tight, overly sequined evening gown she had frantically purchased using her absolute last remaining credit card. They walked out of the dingy, depressing motel and proudly climbed into a rented stretch limousine that smelled faintly of stale smoke and cheap air freshener. The long ride to the Fox Theater was a glorious victory lap in their highly deluded minds. They drank cheap champagne and toasted to their own incredible brilliance. The limousine finally pulled up to the iconic, brilliantly illuminated venue in Midtown Atlanta. The massive, towering marquee flashed with the glowing Origen logo, casting a vibrant, colorful, and electric glow over the bustling, chaotic street. Hundreds of elite guests, corporate titans, Wall Street investors, and flashing press cameras lined the long, luxurious red carpet. Marcus stepped confidently out of the limousine, aggressively buttoning his rented jacket, completely intoxicated by the blinding flashes of the paparazzi and the roaring, excited crowd. "Tonight we take our rightful throne," Marcus declared loudly, puffing out his narrow chest and proudly offering Chloe his arm as they stepped onto the carpet. High above the chaotic, glittering street, I stood perfectly still on the private, velvet-draped balcony of the historic theater. I wore a breathtaking custom-designed crimson gown that commanded the entire night. My posture was rigid, my expression completely unreadable and terrifyingly calm as I looked down at the tiny, pathetic figures stepping onto my red carpet. I held a sleek, solid black remote trigger tightly in my right hand, my thumb resting gently on the smooth activation button. They thought they were arriving for a glorious coronation. They had absolutely no idea I was simply waiting for them to step onto the grand stage before I detonated the explosive, highly public end to their miserable lives. Inside the historic Fox Theater, the atmosphere was thick with staggering wealth, electric anticipation, and the unmistakable scent of corporate victory. The legendary venue had been temporarily transformed from an iconic entertainment palace into a modern, highly fortified citadel of financial triumph. Towering Moorish arches lined with genuine gold leaf perfectly reflected the blinding, relentless flashes of hundreds of credentialed press cameras. The famous cobalt blue ceiling, speckled with twinkling artificial stars, loomed high above a vast ocean of Wall Street investors, Silicon Valley titans, and the absolute elite of Atlanta royalty. Waiters in pristine, tailored white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and imported beluga caviar. I stood gracefully near the base of the sweeping grand staircase, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable power. My custom-designed crimson gown trailed elegantly over the imported marble floor as I confidently fielded rapid-fire questions from top-tier financial journalists. I spoke smoothly, without hesitation, detailing Origen's explosive market projections, our revolutionary, highly guarded supply chain algorithms, and the historic record-breaking morning that awaited us when the New York opening bell finally rang. Every major camera lens was securely locked onto me, eagerly capturing the flawless image of a visionary, self-made CEO resting at the absolute, undisputed pinnacle of her career. Then, the carefully curated, seamless elegance of the evening was violently and abruptly shattered. A loud, obnoxious, and highly physical commotion erupted near the main entrance vestibule. Marcus and Chloe did not simply arrive at the gala, they ruthlessly invaded it. Marcus aggressively shoved his way past the heavy velvet VIP ropes, physically knocking a stunned, heavily built security guard completely backward into a towering floral arrangement. He entirely ignored the frantic, whispering event coordinators who rushed toward him with their glowing tablets and clipboards. He wanted a massive, disruptive spectacle, and he was absolutely determined to force one upon my carefully planned evening. He marched heavily down the center of the plush red carpet, his cheap, poorly fitted rental tuxedo standing out like a rotting, diseased weed in a pristine garden of bespoke silk and tailored velvet. Chloe clung tightly to his left arm, her overly sequined, aggressively tight dress catching the harsh camera lights as she glared at the surrounding wealthy attendees with ravenous, unmasked, and highly toxic envy. Marcus dramatically raised his hands, waving to the deeply confused paparazzi, loudly declaring to anyone within earshot that he was the hidden, unrecognized architect of the evening, the forgotten brilliant genius behind the entire Origen empire. He purposely raised his gravelly voice, ensuring the aggressive journalists standing near the entrance instantly turned their massive lenses away from the organized press lines and focused entirely on his highly disruptive, chaotic entrance. He immediately spotted me standing near the grand, heavy velvet curtains flanking the main stage. A vicious, hungry, and deeply predatory sneer stretched across his flushed face. He abruptly released Chloe's arm and stalked directly across the polished ballroom floor, unapologetically bulldozing his way through tight groups of horrified, whispering billionaires. He completely bypassed my outer perimeter of elite security personnel, entirely unaware that I had specifically covertly ordered my highly trained guards to stand down and let him pass through for this exact critical moment. He aggressively cornered me against the heavy ornate brass railing of the stage stairs, physically trapping me in a tight space between the thick theatrical curtains and his looming hostile presence. He leaned in uncomfortably close, smelling of cheap cologne and desperate sweat, but he purposefully kept his voice booming, carrying a highly theatrical, resonant pitch. He was perfectly calibrating his vocal volume so the eager, highly aggressive financial journalists, hovering just a few feet away, could catch every single scandalous syllable. "Hello, my brilliant darling wife," Marcus declared loudly, painting a grotesque, loving smile onto his face, purely for the benefit of the cameras flashing wildly in our immediate periphery. I could not possibly miss the biggest, most important night of our combined lives. I have been quietly, loyally supporting you from the shadows for 15 long, difficult years, building this incredible, world-changing dream together, and I am finally here to proudly collect my rightful, legally bound share of our massive mutual success. The surrounding reporters immediately leaned in closer, thrusting their digital recorders forward to catch the explosive, highly embarrassing soundbite. Marcus absolutely reveled in the sudden, intense spotlight burning down on him. He reached inside the breast pocket of his cheap rental jacket and pulled out the thick, heavily bound settlement contract that Chloe had delivered to him earlier that morning. With a sudden, violent motion, he aggressively shoved the heavy stack of legal papers directly into the center of my chest, forcing me to stumble back a half step to catch them against my silk gown. "I brought the signed documents just like you desperately begged me to do," he hissed, his voice dropping slightly, but still carrying a lethal, incredibly arrogant edge meant to terrorize me. "You want me to quietly disappear and let you take all the unearned glory for the massive company I helped you build? Fine. I will graciously take your pathetic $10 million buyout. Hand over the certified cashier's check right now, Maya. Give me the money immediately and I will sign this stupid piece of paper and walk out the door. But if you hesitate for even a fraction of a second, I swear I will turn around, face those hungry cameras, and tell the entire world exactly how you stole my brilliant concepts and locked your own devoted, suffering husband out of his rightful billion-dollar kingdom." This was the exact highly critical moment I needed to flawlessly execute the final psychological manipulation of my 15-year revenge. I immediately dropped my confident, untouchable, and highly polished CEO persona. I deliberately let my shoulders hunch forward, physically shrinking my body away from his aggressive, looming posture. I widened my dark eyes, filling them instantly with a perfect, highly convincing manifestation of sheer, unadulterated panic. I clutched the heavy, threatening contract tightly against my chest, my hands vibrating with carefully manufactured, visible terror. I looked dartingly around the opulent room at the watching journalists, then back at Marcus, forcing my breathing to become highly rapid, shallow, and audibly frantic. "Please, Marcus," I whispered frantically, injecting my trembling voice with a fragile, beautiful vulnerability that I knew his highly toxic ego would find absolutely irresistible. "Please, do not do this right now. Do not ruin this night for me, I am begging you. There are major institutional investors everywhere. Wall Street analysts are watching our every move. I have the check right here in my evening clutch, exactly like I promised you. Just keep your voice down, please. Just sign the paper quietly so we can end this nightmare, and you can walk away wealthy. Please do not make a scene." Marcus completely greedily ate it up. He was heavily intoxicated by my manufactured fear, completely blinded by the sheer, unadulterated psychological high of breaking the mighty, untouchable CEO in front of her elite billionaire peers. He let out a harsh barking and incredibly cruel laugh that echoed unpleasantly against the soaring gold arches of the theater. He aggressively snatched a heavy, solid gold promotional pen from a nearby reception table. He did not even bother to read a single line of the dense, impenetrable, and highly lethal legal jargon printed on the pages I had provided. He simply flipped recklessly to the final signature line, his eyes locked onto mine with pure, vicious, and triumphant malice. "You are so incredibly weak, Maya." He mocked, his tone dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust and boundless arrogance. You put on this fancy, expensive dress and stand in this golden room pretending to be a titan, but underneath it all, you are just the exact same pathetic, terrified little girl crying in a hospital room 15 years ago. I broke you then, and I am effortlessly breaking you right now. He violently slashed his signature across the bottom of the contract, pressing so aggressively that the gold pen nearly tore completely through the thick, expensive parchment. He forcefully shoved the legally binding document back into my trembling hands, simultaneously grabbing my silk clutch and ripping the certified $10 million cashier's check right out of the delicate silk lining. He held the small printed slip of paper high up to the chandelier light, his greedy, manic eyes shining with absolute intoxicating and delusional triumph. He had the money. He had exactly what he came for. But the sheer blinding high of his perceived victory pushed his fragile, massive ego entirely over the edge. $10 million suddenly was not enough for him. He did not just want to walk away quietly wealthy. He wanted absolute, undeniable public glory. He shoved the folded check deep into his jacket pocket and aggressively pushed past a line of frantic event coordinators attempting to usher him toward the exit. He marched purposefully toward a terrified sound technician, violently snatching a live wireless microphone right out of the young man's hands. Marcus stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains, walking directly into the blinding spotlight of the main stage, turning to address the hundreds of stunned billionaires and journalists waiting in the grand ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and esteemed members of the global press," Marcus bellowed into the stolen microphone, his voice booming across the cavernous gold-leafed expanse of the grand ballroom. The sudden jarring amplification sliced through the sophisticated murmur of the crowd like a rusty blade. Hundreds of conversations abruptly ceased. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes halted mid-air. Every single face in the elite billionaire-packed audience turned toward the main stage, their expressions shifting from polite, curated curiosity to profound, unvarnished shock. Marcus drank in the sudden absolute silence, mistaking their stunned bewilderment for captivated awe. He paced aggressively across the polished mahogany floorboards of the stage, the harsh theatrical spotlights illuminating his cheap, ill-fitting rental tuxedo. He spread his arms wide in a gesture of benevolent, manufactured humility. "I know many of you are wondering who I am," Marcus continued, his tone dripping with a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated warmth. "You see the brilliant, visionary CEO of Origin on the magazine covers. You read the glowing articles about female empowerment and single-handed triumph. But behind every great historic empire, there is a quiet, steadfast architect who laid the very first bricks. I am Marcus Maya's devoted husband and the silent co-founder of this magnificent company." A collective, breathless gasp rippled through the front rows of the audience. The aggressive flashing of the press cameras instantly redoubled the paparazzi, sensing a massive, unprecedented scandal unfolding live on the eve of a historic public offering. Marcus smiled, a greasy practice stretching of his lips, feeding off the chaotic energy he was generating. 15 years ago, Maya and I started this incredible journey together, from absolutely nothing. He lied smoothly, his voice echoing with false nostalgia. We spent endless, grueling nights in a cramped apartment, coding the original algorithms, building the foundational supply chain models, and sacrificing everything for a shared dream. I happily stepped back into the shadows to let my beautiful, brilliant wife shine in the spotlight. I sacrificed my own public recognition so she could become the ultimate symbol of corporate success. But tonight, on the eve of our ultimate triumph, I simply could not stay hidden any longer. Down at the very edge of the grand stage, just outside the blinding glare of the main spotlights, Chloe stood practically bouncing on her stiletto heels. She smoothed the cheap sequins of her tight evening gown, completely ignoring the disgusted sideways glances she was receiving from the elegantly dressed Wall Street executives standing mere inches away. She smirked widely at the bewildered crowd, radiating a toxic, completely unearned arrogance. She was entirely convinced she was witnessing the birth of a new corporate king, and she was already mentally measuring the throne room. The elite crowd of investors, hedge fund managers, and venture capitalists exchanged deeply troubled, frantic whispers. Smart money despised unpredictability. and Marcus was a walking, talking anomaly, disrupting a highly choreographed financial event. Men in bespoke Tom Ford suits and women in pristine Oscar de la Renta gowns leaned their heads together, frantically texting their analysts and risk management teams. The carefully curated narrative of origin was being violently hijacked by an unkempt stranger making massive unverified claims of foundational ownership. The tension in the historic theater thickened, becoming so dense it threatened to choke the very air from the room. Yet while the billionaires panicked, and the journalists scrambled to record every scandalous syllable, a profound, chilling stillness settled over the wings of the stage. Standing completely concealed within the thick, heavy folds of the crimson velvet curtains, I watched my ex-husband dig his own grave with a golden shovel. The fragile, terrified, panicking victim I had flawlessly portrayed just moments ago evaporated completely. The manufactured terror was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolutely deadly calm. My posture straightened, my spine locking into a line of rigid, unyielding steel. My heart rate slowed to a steady, predatory rhythm. I did not feel a single ounce of fear, nor did I feel any lingering spark of rage. I felt nothing but the pure, icy anticipation of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into the center of a lethal, inescapable snare. Marcus was entirely blinded by his own toxic, fragile ego. He had taken the massive $10 million bait, but his insatiable need for public glory had pushed him to completely overplay his hand. He believed he was dominating the narrative, forcefully extracting his revenge and his fortune simultaneously. He was completely oblivious to the fact that he had just publicly confessed to being intimately, foundationally tied to the exact proprietary algorithm that was currently incinerating Dermacorp's entire global research and development infrastructure. He had just handed me the perfect, undeniable alibi on a silver platter. I slowly raised my hand from the folds of my custom silk gown. I looked directly up into the dark-shadowed recesses of the theater's balcony, locating the highly secure, heavily tinted glass of the master sound booth. My lead security director and my chief communications officer were waiting up there, watching the monitors with bated breath. I caught their attention and delivered a single sharp and decisive nod. The final sequence was officially authorized. Without making a sound, Zarya stepped out from the opposite side of the grand stage. She glided effortlessly into the harsh, blinding glow of the theatrical spotlights, her presence instantly commanding the fractured attention of the chaotic room. She wore a sleek, immaculate emerald pantsuit that mirrored my own formidable elegance, her posture radiating an intense, terrifyingly mature authority. The murmurs in the crowd instantly died down. The Wall Street elite recognized the brilliant, highly publicized heir apparent of the Origin Empire. They held their breath, waiting to see how the crown princess would handle this unprecedented, humiliating public intrusion. Marcus paused his rambling, self-aggrandizing speech as he noticed movement to his right. He turned, his greasy smile widening as he saw his daughter approaching him across the polished mahogany boards. He immediately saw another prime opportunity to solidify his fabricated narrative of the loving, reunited family. He aggressively opened his arms wide, holding the microphone awkwardly in one hand, intending to pull Zarya into a highly publicized, deeply emotional embrace for the hundreds of flashing press cameras. "And here she is, my beautiful, brilliant daughter," Marcus bellowed into the microphone, taking a heavy, eager step toward her. Zarya did not flinch. She did not break her stride. With an incredibly smooth, utterly flawless pivot, she gracefully stepped back, completely evading his sweaty, desperate grasp. She left his arms hanging awkwardly in the empty air, exposing his forced affection to the merciless scrutiny of the silent, watching billionaires. She smiled at him, a warm, bright, and completely hollow expression that flawlessly masked the sheer, unadulterated contempt burning behind her dark eyes. "My father has always been full of surprises," Zarya announced, her voice projecting clearly and powerfully across the massive ballroom without the need for a microphone. Her tone was light, pleasant, and completely devoid of the panic Marcus so desperately wanted to see. She turned her gaze away from his confused, rapidly flushing face and looked out at the vast sea of influential guests and aggressive journalists. "He loves to make grand entrances and share incredible stories. In fact, he is so dedicated to the history of this company that he actually brought a very special, highly detailed presentation for us to enjoy tonight. Marcus blinked, his thick brow furrowing in profound confusion. He lowered his arms, clutching the microphone tightly, suddenly realizing he had entirely lost control of the script. Zarya smoothly raised the sleek silver iPad she held in her left hand. She did not hesitate. She tapped a single highly encrypted command sequence onto the glowing glass screen. The reaction was instantaneous and absolute. The massive, brilliant crystal chandeliers hanging from the cobalt blue ceiling abruptly snapped off. The heavy, warm, ambient lighting illuminating the grand ballroom vanished. The harsh, blinding theatrical spotlights focused on Marcus instantly died. The entire historic Fox Theater was violently plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. Simultaneously, the wireless microphone gripped tightly in Marcus's sweaty palm emitted a sharp, highly unpleasant burst of static before going completely dead, silencing his arrogant voice entirely. The crowd gasped in the sudden, suffocating blackness. Then, with a loud, terrifying electronic crackle that shook the very floorboards, the massive, 50-foot LED screen directly behind him crackled to life. It did not display the sleek, modernized Auragen corporate logo. It did not flash intricate, impressive financial graphs or projected quarterly earnings for the eager investors. Instead, the colossal digital canvas was completely overwhelmed by cold, sterile, and deeply depressing fluorescent lighting. It was raw, unedited security footage captured from a hospital intensive care unit exactly 15 years ago. The grainy archival video had been meticulously upscaled to crystal clear, undeniable high definition. The audio stripped of all background hospital hum and flawlessly enhanced by Zarya's proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms, exploded through the theater's state-of-the-art, multi-directional surround sound system. The acoustics were so terrifyingly perfect that it felt as though the ghosts of the past had physically materialized on the grand stage. The visual revealed a much younger, utterly exhausted and heartbroken version of myself. I was lying in a stark metal hospital bed, my face pale and drawn, clutching a tiny, incredibly fragile newborn bundle wrapped in a thin thermal blanket. The massive speakers crackled, broadcasting the heavy, arrogant footsteps of a younger Marcus swaggering into the frame. He looked impatient, deeply annoyed, and completely devoid of any basic human empathy. He did not ask about the health of his wife. He did not look at his premature daughter fighting for her life in a plastic incubator. The entire theater held its collective breath as the colossal audio system broadcast his cruel, sneering voice with absolute, devastating clarity. "You and that little girl are just a burden to me." The harsh, incredibly vicious words struck the opulent, gold-leafed ballroom like physical heavy blows. The sheer, unfiltered venom in his tone was undeniable, echoing violently against the Moorish arches. He stood over the hospital bed, glaring down at his weeping, vulnerable wife and sick child with pure, unadulterated disgust. The staggering juxtaposition of the man who had just stood center stage, claiming to be the loving, devoted co-founder against the monstrous, abusive reality playing out on the 50-foot canvas was jarring and absolute. The absolute elite of Atlanta men and women who brokered ruthless corporate takeovers before breakfast physically recoiled in their plush velvet seats. A collective horrified gasp ripped through the dense sea of Wall Street investors, hedge fund managers, and media elites. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes completely ceased. The digital playback above Marcus did not stop. It ruthlessly continued its historical documentation. The massive screen now showed a young, heavily made-up Chloe strutting arrogantly into the sterile ICU. She was loudly chewing gum, draped head to toe in expensive designer clothing bought directly with my completely drained savings account. She looked down at the fragile infant in the incubator, wrinkling her nose in profound theatrical disgust. She delivered a string of vain, incredibly callous insults directed at the newborn, loudly mocking the baby's desperate fight for survival and bitterly complaining about the medicinal smell of the hospital room ruining her expensive perfume. The live audience at the Fox Theater turned their collective, disgusted gaze directly toward the real Chloe, who was currently shrinking back against the brass railing of the stage stairs. her face burned with profound, inescapable, and highly public humiliation. The Wall Street executives she had smirked at just moments ago now stared at her with open, freezing contempt. The video then cut sharply to the final, most damning and legally binding scene. A young hospital attorney stood in the drab room holding a thick clipboard. Marcus was shown eagerly, gleefully demanding the pen. He loudly, aggressively declared to the attorney that he would not pay a single dime in child support for a sick, worthless infant. He violently signed a legally binding, irrevocable relinquishment of all parental and marital rights, officially severing all ties to his wife and child forever. He laughed a harsh, cruel sound as he carelessly tossed the clipboard back onto the hospital bed, effectively abandoning his family to financial and emotional ruin. The historic theater was instantly plunged into a suffocating, deafening silence. Nobody whispered a single word. Nobody dared to breathe. The horrifying reality of the footage paralyzed the room. The only sound remaining in the cavernous, brilliantly illuminated space was the relentless mechanical and rapid-fire clicking of hundreds of press cameras. The paparazzi, smelling the absolute destruction of a man, ruthlessly captured Marcus's sweaty, terrified face. He was bathed in the pale, cold light of the giant screen, broadcasting his ultimate, undeniable, and permanent shame to the entire world. Marcus completely and spectacularly shattered. His grandiose, deeply fragile delusion collapsed entirely under the crushing, suffocating weight of global public exposure. He spun around wildly, his dress shoes slipping on the polished mahogany stage. He frantically clawed at the massive LED screen behind him, his fingers uselessly scraping against the digital pixels as if he could physically tear the horrifying broadcast apart with his bare hands. He started screaming wildly into the dead, unamplified microphone, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. He begged the audience to look away, shrieking at the top of his lungs that it was a deep fake, a highly manufactured, artificial intelligence hit job specifically designed by a bitter ex-wife to ruin his flawless, upstanding reputation. But the elite investors and journalists were not fools. They recognized raw, unfiltered, and legally verified reality when it was projected 50 feet high. Down by the velvet VIP ropes, Chloe realized the ship was sinking rapidly and violently. She abandoned Marcus instantly, driven purely by her parasitic survival instincts. She lifted the heavy sequined hem of her cheap evening gown and sprinted frantically toward the grand brass exit doors at the back of the theater. She slammed her hands aggressively against the heavy handles, shoving her entire body weight against the wood, but the doors did not budge a single inch. Vance and his elite, heavily armed security team stepped smoothly out of the ornate shadows, their faces carved from absolute stone. They had already engaged the heavy industrial deadbolts. The doors were permanently locked. There was absolutely no escape from the reckoning. Suddenly, a single brilliant and perfectly calibrated white spotlight sliced cleanly through the pitch-black darkness of the theater. It hit the exact center of the main stage. I walked slowly, purposefully out from the heavy crimson velvet curtains. My custom gown flowed seamlessly behind me, a physical, commanding manifestation of total, uncompromising victory. I did not rush. I commanded the space, stepping effortlessly past Marcus, who was currently scrambling pathetically on his hands and knees, desperately trying to yank thick industrial power cables out of the stage floorboards to kill the screen. I stopped perfectly in the center of the blinding spotlight, radiating absolute glacial power. I reached out gracefully and accepted a live, fully amplified microphone from Zarya. The entire ballroom waited in suspended, breathless animation. I looked down at the pathetic, sweating, ruined man cowering helplessly at my feet. "You wanted to claim your legacy, Marcus? Let's talk about your legacy as of 10 minutes ago." Marcus watched the federal agents advancing down the aisle, the reality of his total annihilation finally breaking through his thick skull. He collapsed completely, his body hitting the mahogany stage with a dull, pathetic thud. Every single ounce of his bloated arrogance evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, terrified shell of a man. He scrambled desperately on his hands and knees, his rented tuxedo pants tearing against the wooden boards as he frantically crawled toward where Zarya and I stood, bathed in the blinding spotlight. Snot and tears streamed freely down his flushed, sweaty face, completely ruining his curated image of a corporate conqueror. He reached out with shaking, desperate hands, clawing pathetically at the hem of my crimson gown. He sobbed hysterically, the sound a wet, guttural wail that echoed terribly across the silent theater. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I am sorry, I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I made a terrible mistake. I was stupid and greedy. Please, you have to stop them. You have all the power here. Just tell them it was a massive misunderstanding." He shifted his frantic, bloodshot eyes toward Zarya, who stood perfectly still beside me, a monument of unbreakable composure. He lunged forward, trying to grab her ankle, playing his absolute last desperate card. "Zarya, please look at me. I am your father. We share the exact same blood. You cannot let them do this to your own family. Do not let them take me away to a federal prison, Zarya. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, save me." Zarya did not flinch. She did not take a single step backward to avoid his grasping, frantic hands. She stood towering above him in her immaculate emerald suit, looking down at the groveling, pathetic creature bleeding dignity onto the stage. She did not yell. She did not cry. Her face was a masterclass in absolute bone-chilling calmness, a perfect, flawless mirror of the unyielding strength I had poured into her every single day of her life. She tilted her head slightly, studying his tear-streaked, desperate face, with the clinical, detached curiosity of a scientist examining a crushed, insignificant insect. She let his hysterical sobbing echo through the cavernous, gold-leafed hall for a long, agonizing moment before she finally chose to speak. Her voice was smooth, quiet, and carried a lethal, freezing resonance that cut through his manic panic like a sharpened scalpel. "You are completely mistaken," she said, her tone utterly devoid of any warmth, any pity, or any mercy. "I do not have a father." The entire Fox Theater hung on her every syllable, captivated by the raw, undeniable power radiating from the young, brilliant air. Marcus froze, his mouth gaping open as her words struck him with physical force. "My father died in an intensive care room 15 years ago." She continued, her dark eyes locking onto his terrified gaze with absolute unblinking intensity. "He died right around the exact same time he looked at a fragile, premature baby in a plastic incubator and called her nothing but a burden. You are just a stranger in a cheap suit who made a terrible, fatal miscalculation." Zarya slowly stepped back, completely removing herself from his reach physically and emotionally, severing the final, non-existent tie with cold, absolute finality. The lead federal agent stepped heavily onto the stage, entirely ignoring Marcus's frantic, blubbering pleas and desperate bargaining. He forcefully hauled Marcus up by the collar of his ruined rental jacket, swiftly kicking his legs apart and slamming the heavy steel handcuffs brutally around his wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly through the overhead microphone array, signaling the definitive end of his pathetic extortion attempt. Across the opulent room, two more armed agents dragged a wildly thrashing, hysterical Chloe away from the locked brass doors, her high-pitched screams of denial mingling with Marcus's broken, defeated sobbing as they were hauled toward the service exits. We did not watch them leave. We did not give them the satisfaction of a single, parting glance. Zarya and I simply turned our backs to the chaotic, degrading spectacle, facing the vast sea of billionaires and industry titans who had witnessed our absolute victory. The suffocating silence of the theater finally shattered. The elite crowd erupted into a deafening, thunderous standing ovation. The applause rolled over the stage in massive, resounding waves, a profound, undeniable validation of our strength, our flawless execution, and our absolute, untouchable supremacy in the corporate world. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure triumph, and extended my arm. Zarya linked her arm firmly through mine, matching my proud, victorious smile. Mother and daughter side by side, we stepped gracefully off the grand stage. We walked smoothly and confidently down the center aisle, moving effortlessly through the parted sea of flashing press cameras and cheering, awestruck investors. We glided out of the historic theater's grand foyer and stepped out into the crisp, cool Atlanta night, leaving the noise, the drama, and the wreckage far behind us. A sleek, midnight black, Maybach waited silently at the illuminated curb, its heavy doors held open by our loyal elite security team. We climbed into the luxurious leather interior as the glittering city skyline loomed above us, reflecting the dawn of a new glorious era. The Origen initial public offering would officially launch in just a few short hours, mathematically guaranteed to shatter every financial record in Wall Street history. We looked entirely forward, our brilliant empire totally secure, leaving the human garbage exactly where it belonged, buried permanently and completely in the past.